The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the country. It's Mark from SolidCAM. We'll be doing our 30-minute free training session today for SolidCAM Live. With me, as always, is Kevin Rankel. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, how's it going?
So, welcome back this week. We'll be doing some stuff here and there this week. Today, if you're looking at my screen, you can see that I've engraved the number 69 on this piece of wood. But actually, I'll show you how I started with just the number 6 and using a nested transform, combination transformations, I get something that looks like this. So I did that over and over again across this piece of material. So let's exit out of here and see how all of that was generated from. It's a massive amount of code, but once we exit out of here.
And kind of how, for everyone's background, how this kind of came up is a customer of ours is looking on how to almost nest a part and many parts in there. So there's many ways of kind of going about this. And for this particular one, Mark's just doing an engraving. But this would be no different than if you were using a pocket operation to pocket this out. As well as anything else. But basically what this customer is looking to do is program the part one time and then expand it out to be able to fit as many as possible on this 4x8 sheet of plywood or whatever.
Yep. So I literally made this out of wood using the SolidWorks material selection. So I went all out with this presentation here. But so there is my block letter of number 6. Let's just take a look at that once again. So from there, I programmed it as an engraving. So I think we saw this, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, where in the geometry section, I've chosen as my geometry that text. That text was translated into chain geometry. I'm using a chamfer mill on this one. And the engraving depth was supposed to be about 5 thou, but it looks like it lost it there for a second, but I actually programmed this as a V carving. So that's how we get that toolpath that looks like it's just going right down the center. It's a V carve. So with that particular tool, it does a little bit of that. It goes around getting that EV carve. So this is specifically an engraving toolpath, but this can work with any of our 2.5D, even 3D toolpaths, depending on what type of transform you're doing. And the transform command, you can always right click on the toolpath and go to transform, or inside the toolpath itself, you can click on this icon here. And what that'll do is it'll bring you to the transform window. In the transform window, you have the option in the top left corner of adding the transforms to the original operation, which is what I've done here. So every time I check this box, you can see there's a little icon next to the usual icon indicating that some transforms have been added to this operation. So if I'm looking to do all the instances in one toolpath, I can just add the operation transformations to the one toolpath. So I only have one thing that represents the transforms. If I'd like to do the transforms as a separate operation, let's say you want to have the first instance as maybe a prove out operation, and then you want to have a secondary operation that is the entire thing. Or you want to do maybe different instances of maybe the second and third one, or whatever combination you want to do. This second option here allows you to add the transformed operation immediately after in the operations tree. Whenever I do on-site training, I usually have 2 markers of 2 different colors, and on the whiteboard, I would show something like, actually, I have a virtual whiteboard, so let's bring that up. So what I normally would do to highlight how this works is, one, let's get rid of that. Delete that, and let's do a new one. So I usually pull up something like this. I have the original toolpath. Let's just say it's one line, and then I have this transform, and then another transform. So what I usually describe is something like this. If we take the original, and I have a toolpath that I'm basically going to make copies of, like that, I can get them to shuffle immediately after. So if I make a transform of this one, I can get it to be immediately after, or with that third option, I can put it right at the end of the operations tree. So with the 2 different toolpaths, what this would actually look like is something like this. Let's say we take the original, and then we take that toolpath and that toolpath, if I were to, actually, let's jump back here and we'll do it with this one here. If I do them shuffling, what we get is something that looks kind of like this. We would have the copy and then the second copy, copy, and then second copy. So we can actually get them to be shuffled like that so that the transforms happen something like first instance, tool 1, first instance, tool 2, for second instance, tool 1, second instance, tool 2, something like that. If we use that last option, it actually adds all the transforms at the end. So we would get something that kind of looks like a couple of transforms like that, and then a couple of transforms like that. So one of them shuffles it in between each one, and one of them just puts all the transforms at the end. And once you actually play around with the transform command, you'll actually see how that works. But keep in mind that as soon as you add those transforms, whether immediately after or putting it right at the end of the operations tree, they are toolpaths like any other toolpath. You can actually grab and drag them to where you'd like them to be anyway. So this is just to get them on screen. But then once they're on screen, then you can shuffle them around, reorder them. You can use the auto sorting command to put all the same tools together or the same max together, whatever order you want to put these toolpaths. This is just to get them on screen, very much like we see when we do anything inside SolidCAM. Get it on screen, and then you can modify it afterwards. That's just that top left corner there as to how you can create the toolpath. But the actual types of transformations are on the right side here. And as you can see, I've already created a few here. We could talk about the ones that I've already done. So I actually did a rotate around this point right here to get the 9. Basically 6 flipped around and gets that 9. And then I added on top of that rotation a translate to get all those numbers there. Let me add a copy, basically. I'm going to recreate that engraving toolpath, and then we can see how we added those transformations. So I'm going to go new geometry. As we saw before, since I'm doing engraving and I have some text geometry there, I'm going to use my multi-chain filter of the text. Click on that letter right there. Turns that SolidWorks text into a chain, or 2 chains in this case. I have my chain geometry. Let's go and choose my tool. And since I'm intending to do some V carving, I've got a chamfer tool there with a nice little tip on there. Levels, we'll just say from that face down 5 thou. And then I'm just going to say tool side left, fill area, middle line only, and then we'll do a V carve. Okay, so we get a simple 2.5D toolpath. Now I'd like to transform that. I'm going to right click, transform. We'll start with adding that transformation to the same toolpath. So we'll do like we did previously. We'll go to rotate. And when you click on any one of these, rotate or translate, what you get is a submenu that says delta or list. Delta is if it's a repeating pattern. So you can tell it in the case of rotate, let's say a bolt pattern, bolt circle. You've got 6 instances of 60 degrees apart. So that's a repeating pattern, repeating instance with the same distance apart. If I were to do list, let me just click on list to show you, I can actually insert an angle step, how many times I'd like to do it, and then I can actually put in a different instance each time. So if I don't have a regular pattern, I have something like the first instance is at 30 degrees, the next instance is at 35 degrees, the next one is at 70 degrees. That irregular pattern is what I can recreate using the list icon. But oftentimes you're going to use something like delta, where it's just the same repeating pattern. So let's say we want to do in this one operation the 6 and then the 9. So I'll say 2 rotations, the original plus the copy. Starting angle is at 0, angle step 180. Now I'm going to get it to rotate around the z-axis for now, just to show how that works. So by default, it's going to rotate around the z-axis. You can see that it made that copy up in the corner there. But I'm not actually looking to rotate it around the z-axis. This doesn't make sense for what I'm doing here. I want to rotate around that point. So what I should have done, so I'll just go back into it. I'm going to edit it. And I'm actually going to choose a rotate point. So it's going to rotate around a z-axis, but that passes through this point right here. And let's see if that actually works. There it is. So it's still using the z-axis as a vector, but it's passing through that point. So I'm still just kind of moving the z-axis, moving my rotational axis to that point there. So we can get that 9. So now we have basically the full toolpath. It's this that I want to take and copy across the part. So I'll just go back into transform. I'll right click on the pre-existing transform and click add. And now I can go to translate. And again, we get the same sort of submenu. We get matrix versus list. Matrix is just their way of referring to the fact that you're now going to do a translate in a repeating pattern in one direction and another direction. So instead of delta, which is normally what we'd use for terminology for rotations, we're going to use matrix, which is like a linear array. I'm just going to go to matrix, including the original operation, so that one right there. I can actually, you saw this in both the rotate and you can see here in translate, we have different ways of defining the axis. So for linear, it actually is pretty self-explanatory. If I stay with the current position, I'm using the X and Y axis of Mac on position 1. If I had other coordinate systems, other Macs, I can click on that and then choose the X, Y, YZ, ZX of any one of those coordinate systems. I can even click on the list and get all my other coordinate systems. So this can be really helpful if you've got maybe like a 5-axis part where you're doing some indexed operation, but you're not looking to actually do a linear transform or a translate in the x-axis of, let's say, Mac 1 position 3. You actually want to reference the original coordinate system and then just translate in that x and y direction. So this allows you to choose the Mac position to dictate what angles you'd like to use, what coordinate systems you'd like to use. Or you can actually just go right down to the bottom here and choose your own individual coordinate systems here, own individual directions. This one right here, this last one, is super helpful when you're doing some sort of diamond array where you've got a diamond parameter, diamond linear translate that you're trying to do. So you've got these different weird angles that you'd like to go across. But for what we're doing here, really simple, X and Y. And like I said, this is a repeating pattern. So number of copies in X, I just happen to know because I already did this. There's 32 copies with a step of 3 inches. And then in the Y direction, 24 copies of this with a step of 2 inches. So basically in those two directions, I can just find my mouse, what will happen is it'll go in that X direction of Mac 1 position 1 and that Y direction of Mac 1 position 1. And because we have so many instances that we're going to create, I'm actually going to go and sort these so that instead of going in one row, then rapiding back to the beginning and doing the next row, I'm actually going to get this serpentine pattern here. So I'll click OK, click Save. And then what happens is as soon as I do that, it adds it to the operation. You can see that it'll bring up that toolpath we were looking at a second ago. It'll do the translate of the 6, so we get a 69, and then that 69 gets translated across the entire part. So while we're waiting for that to kind of catch up, you can see that the other options that are listed there are mirror. Let's see if I can move my mouse over there. The mirror command is actually better done with the external mirror command. There's another command that we've added, I think it was about in 2017 or 2018, that does a better job. There's more options in that mirror command for actually mirroring a toolpath. The 4th axis option is more for a 4th axis machine. So a 3+1 machine or any machine that has a rotary on it. Instead of doing a rotation, what it does is it indexes the part around the rotary. So a lot of people get confused between rotate and 4th axis. Rotate, think of rotate like you're moving the tool around a center axis. You're doing a bolt circle. Whereas with 4th axis, you're doing the flats on a cylinder. So you've got it set up in your mill turn, you do one flat, you want the part to index by 60 degrees, 90 degrees, whatever it is, and then the tool stays stationary. The part moves, whereas in rotate, the part stays stationary and the tool moves around, let's say like a bolt circle or something like that. Or in our case, it rotates it around a point that I chose. Okay. So one reason why you might want to do all the translations in one toolpath, outside of, let's say, having all the geometry on the part, or doing a those secondary options in the top left corner I was talking about, is because as soon as you make a change to one toolpath, it goes and gets carried over to all the instances. So the transform command can be really helpful anytime you see a lot of repetition. If there's a mirror, like a symmetry, if there's a rotation, or if there's a translation, anytime you can use transform, it's always the first thing I'll show people that when they're asking for a reduction of programming time, or anything like that, because a lot of times if you just do something once and then get it to be copied, it's a lot easier than having to go and troubleshoot, in this case, 24 by 32 operations or any series of that. So if you could do it once and get it to be copied, you're better off.
Now,
And you'll notice, sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that, if you guys are running also, it doesn't have to be the same part. So what Mark can actually do in here is he did a SolidCAM new milling on this particular part, but you guys can add multiple different targets in here and then do that as a pattern too. So if we had, like an L shape and then maybe a T shape and then maybe an A shape in there that we're pocketing out, those are the three components that we want to put on here. Go ahead and put those on there as the target model and then go through the same process as what Mark was just showing you. So you guys can have multiple different targets in here and keep copying that over to fill up, that space that you have, in this particular case, a 4x8 sheet of plywood.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually, if we go back to the transform command, that's very useful for that last option there, coordinate system, where let's say on one table of your machine, you've got 4 different parts. And this being a Haas, it would be G54, G55, G56, G57. Wherever they are on the table, they don't even have to be in a properly set up array or anything like that. They just have to be set up by offsets. I can actually transform any toolpath from one coordinate system to another. Basically, if I set up all 4 offsets on my table, I just have to program one instance of the part, and then I can transform all those toolpaths from part 1 to part 2 to part 3 to part 4, and all I had to do was just set up coordinate systems on part 1, part 3, part 2, part 3, part 4. So there's a lot of easy ways to do repetition, to save a lot of working time, programming time, when you see that there's some sort of repetition, symmetry, linear rotational arrays, anything like that.
And for Aaron, I see that you're on here. Does that make sense for you? Hopefully.
Yep.
I haven't seen him right back yet, but.
Okay.
And for anybody else that's on here, is that, this SolidCAM does not have nesting built in. So, and what nesting is you give software a part, multiple parts, or just one part, and it will fit as many as you can on there. But this is the next best thing to do for that. So, like Mark was saying, you guys only have to program this part one time and one time only, and then we can make copies of it that many times in X, that many copies in Y.
So what I'm doing now is I'm basically just going to do the same thing on the back side of the part. I'm going to set up a new coordinate system for the back side, and then we'll see how we can add a coordinate system transform. But what I wanted to point out was next to each operation, there's usually an icon that shows what type of operation it is. So in this case, we have that little E next to a surface indicating that this is a engraving toolpath. But now it has that little white box with some letters in it. Now, I'm not sure if that's coming through well on the GoToMeeting, but next to the one that is currently just a transform, so this is just transforming the letter 6, it has a little T next to it. If it was a rotate, it would have a little R next to it. If it's a 4th axis, it would have a little 4 next to it. So there's a lot of stuff in there that that'll indicate what's going on with that particular toolpath. And since the first one is both a rotate and a translate, now it just has an X to it. Just says X, indicating that there's at least 2 types of transforms applied to it. Okay, so I just want to double check. This is on the top center. Okay, so with the coordinate system transform, it's actually pretty important that when you set up your other coordinate systems, the ones you're going to copy to, they have to be essentially in the same position relative to the part. So if that one was top center, then on this side, it has to be top center as well, which it is. Okay, and then X and Y, Should be in relatively the same direction. So now I have my Mac 2.
Now, if you didn't have that fancy wood look on there, it'd be easier to see.
I was trying to be fancy with making it look like wood, and then yeah, I realized after I would not be able to see a lot of my stuff. So that's my mistake. Okay, so let's go to transform, and then what we'll do is we'll transform this one using coordinate system transform. I'll include the original, and then you can see in my list the original has a checkbox next to it. It's kind of purple, just indicating that I'm just including the original in this toolpath translation here. And then now in my list, I can see other Mac positions available in this one part file. In this case, Mac 2. So by including Mac 2, I'll click OK, click Save. I have 2 transforms applied to this file or to this this toolpath, so it'll have an X next to it. And what it's actually doing now is it's copying that linear transform to Mac 2. In our case, it's the second side of the part. It's the back side of the part. But in reality, this could have been any other part that is under any other offset. And really, the only thing I had to do was just make sure that the coordinate system was set up, oriented correctly to the part like it was in Mac 1. This is a really simple example, but the more extreme example, the more useful example would be something like a horizontal machine or a tombstone. A lot of customers that work on tombstones, they program one part, and then they're using a tombstone for the purposes of production. So they've got maybe 4 or 8 parts that they have to machine. If the parts are all set up the same way, so the vices are on the tombstone facing the same direction, the part is oriented the same direction, then all you got to do is just program once, and then every part on that tombstone, no matter what face of the tombstone it's on, will get machined in the exact same way. And because of the fact that it's a tombstone, it's rotating, you want to save, you want to minimize tool changes, you can use that option in the top left corner there so that you actually shuffle the toolpath. So you actually get part 1, face 1, part 1, face 2, part 1, face 3, and it's all the same tool. So once you get the toolpath on screen, shuffling it, organizing it, sorting it, that's all up to you, but you can do as much sorting as you need to minimize tool changes, minimize cycle time, whatever it is you're looking to do. But if we take a look at what I've done, I actually have now a toolpath on side 1 and side 2. And I'm not going to try and simulate that because it would take forever. But basically, that is what that guy is. Yeah, that's a whole lot of toolpath.
And kind of like we're kind of getting at everyone, the biggest point I want everyone to see out of this is we only had to program this one time. And then just making copies, going back and forth.
I'm going to see if I can bring up the updated stock while we do the closer here. So any questions on this? Anything else? If you have any questions, there's a questions panel in the GoToMeeting, so you can submit your questions there. If we don't get to it today, because we are kind of running late on time today, what we do is we save those questions to our script, and then throughout the week until the end of the month, as many of these classes as we're going to do, we'll save those questions, we'll get to them. If you have a part or a question, you can use the email that Kevin's about to put in the chat section. Use that email to send me your part. If it's the kind of thing that you don't really want to see on YouTube, but you'd like to have your own personalized training on that part, use that same email to contact me with the day and time that you're free. We can get into your own personalized training session using GoToMeeting. That personalized session actually uses the phone line as well. So if you wanted to call me, if you wanted to get into GoToMeeting and speak with me directly live in your own training session, absolutely, that's pretty much what the personalized training session is for. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, use that email. If you know anybody that can benefit from SolidCAM, give them our contact info or put them in contact with us. And then what will happen is if they get into a demo, you get that $100 gift card. If it goes to sale, you get 20% of that sale. So by helping us spread the word of SolidCAM, you get a little bit of something. So that's always a good thing. We will continue this until the end of the month currently, every day at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So if you have any questions, we'll definitely have a chance to cover it. I think, Kevin, what days did you say that you weren't here? I'm going solo this week, so I just wanted to...
So Mark will be going solo the 22nd through the 28th.
22nd to 28th. So that's starting on Wednesday. So if you guys want to only attend classes with Dr. KevCam, then you know what days to miss. So definitely, if you guys have any suggestions or questions or anything like that, that'd be really helpful, because if I'm going solo, you guys have seen it. I don't know what I'm doing without Kevin's help.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so basically for the end of the week and the end of the month, we'll be doing this every day at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So send your questions in using that email. Until then, until tomorrow at 2 p.m., stay safe, keep your family safe, keep busy. We will talk to you guys soon.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.